this will be your graded assignment, one of them for Unit 3. So we want to go through that together and make sure that we understand what to do and how to do it. So let me get back to the science homepage. And just a reminder that we do record all the sessions. You can go back and watch those. There's a recording library in the course in the announcements. And there is, you can go to my schedule and go back through that calendar. And you're able to see past sessions. You just click the title and you can watch those there. All right, so our objective today is we're going to interact with each other, work together to complete this lab, and just be able to identify a substance using physical and chemical properties. All right, so don't forget that in your science notebook for this lesson, you have 3 guiding questions to answer, and there are notes to take. So there's always the laboratory portion of the lesson. And that gives you some helpful information, not only content you need to learn in the unit, but also to help you understand how to answer the lab questions. So really quick, I'm going to go back to the homepage just for those of you that may not realize where the lab report documents are that I have upgraded. All right, so your home screen looks something like this. When you go to content, at the top, and then when you scroll down, here are the lab report documents. Okay, so when you click that, you are able to see the lab report Word documents that you need for units 1 through 5. And again, these are the same questions that you have in the document that's in the lesson 3.12 or in the lab lesson. I've just enhanced it a little bit, adding in some features or hints that will help make it easier. So that's the one we'll be working off of today. It looks like this. You'll know that it's the document that I created or updated. When you see text boxes, I added those. I added the red font. So that is how you'll know. All right. So going back, let's take a look at the slides again. I'm sorry, there's such a pause after every click I make. It just pauses for a long time. Okay, so we talked about the guiding questions, and we talked about where to find the lab report documents. Again, I encourage you to print these out, write down things with me as we go, because we are talking through the experiment. Okay. So this is number 3.12, and you submit it in the 3.13 Dropbox. So as we get started, the first thing I want to do is go through the lab report and just see what we're looking at. I think that's always a great place to start. So again, I'll share really quickly. I say really quickly, and here we are. Okay. All right. So starting at the beginning, we want to find out what's the purpose of this experiment. We want to be able, how can you identify that a gas is produced in a chemical reaction without observing the atoms and the molecules directly? So up until this point, we have used the just the chemical formula that we've looked at, and we've seen, atoms and molecules move around, and that's how we know reaction has occurred. But if we're looking at vinegar and baking soda like we are in this experiment, you can't really tell that there are molecules moving around or that a reaction has occurred, right? So we've got to figure out an indirect way to do that. And so we're basically trying to do what we did in the Unit 2 lab. So do you guys remember Unit 2, what physical property did we use to identify the unknown substances? Anyone remember? Think back to Unit 2. You measured and calculated something in Unit 2. Yes, it was density. And so that's how we were able to determine what the other metals were. And so in this case, we're using a chemical property, right? We're trying to figure out if a chemical reaction has occurred by testing to see what gas was produced. So we're looking at that today with chemical reactions instead of like a physical property. We're going to write a hypothesis. So based on an if I do this, then I should see this. So we'll do that. It looks very similar to what you guys have seen. We're going to identify the scientific tools that we used in this experiment. We will type out our procedure in order, numbered steps. And then if you're using the lab report that I created or updated, it gives you a data table, kind of gives you some things to fill in as you go through and do the experiment. All right, and then there is your conclusion question at the end. And finally here, we're looking at the chemical formula, right? We're looking at the vinegar and baking soda mixing together, cause a reaction. This is the chemical formula of that. And then we're looking at the reaction and talking about what happened, kind of identifying some of those things and being able to see what gases were produced. So that is what we're going to do. All right, everybody good there? Questions so far? And just a reminder, with the permanent zero deadline coming up on the 30th, it is only the lab reports and science notebooks from units 1 and 2. So if you've been reading the emails that I've sent, the emails I send every Monday, all of that information is in there. All right. So let's go back and take a look at our next steps. All right, so in the lesson, it talks about chemical reactions, and each pure substance has characteristic physical and chemical properties. We know that atoms are too small to see, so we have to rely on indirect observations that are related to the properties of a substance to be able to identify things. Okay, so we have to indirectly observe. And so we'll come back to that. Chemical properties can only be observed by changing a substance's chemical identity in a chemical reaction. Okay, so we've got to make something happen so that we are able to identify what's going on in our experiment. And then flammability is just the example of it's one of the chemical properties that we've discussed. Remember, we've talked about flammability. Do you guys remember any of the other ones? Any other chemical properties that you remember from reading so far in your lessons? Hopefully you know these words. Chemical property. They're also on the screen. So focus in, list some words. What are some chemical properties? So out of the 8 of you in here, I hope somebody, thank you, Juliana. We've got toxicity, reactivity, chemical stability, flammability. Thank you so much for putting those in chat. All right, so those are other chemical properties that we could look at. All right, so next it says the word indirect. What do you think that word means? I'm going to put the polling tool up. Indirect, you can click A or B. Is it being able to identify something based on other information? Or is it seeing something and recording it? We saw the word indirect observations earlier. We had to make some indirect observations. All right, so 5 of you have answered, and 6 of you have answered, and you're correct. It does mean being able to identify something based on other information. All right, so other important things that you might want to note. What are we looking at doing today? What is the purpose of the experiment? This is always question number 1. We're trying to identify the gas that's produced in a chemical reaction. Okay, so that's the purpose. We're trying to identify the gas produced in a chemical reaction. Okay, that's on page 2 of 4, so you may want to make a note there. All right, so we talked about this earlier, and we know that we used the physical property density. And so we're going to be kind of going over to a Jamboard really quick to fill in some things that you guys will be able to use as you fill in your lab report. All right, so I'm going to copy this link, and hang on one second. Slow today. Here we go. All right. There's the link so you can get into the Jamboard. All right, and once you hop in on page 1, it shows you can go ahead and practice because we've already answered this question, so you already know it. Use the sticky note feature. So if you look down at the toolbar on the left side and there is a sticky note, it's the 4th one down, and click it. You can change the color, stick it on the board, and write down the word that we just identified a little earlier about the physical property we used in 2.17. All right. See some stuff coming in? Good job. All right, so for the 2 of you that put an answer there, thank you so much. Yes, we were looking at the density. All right, so if you go on to the next slide, if you've read through the lesson, part of it takes you through an oxygen splint test and 2 other gases. So we look at 3 gases, and we are just recording what do we see when we watch these splint tests happen. Okay, so for the oxygen splint test, when it reacts with oxygen gas, if you look at the screen in the Jamboard, and if any of you just came in, it looks like our numbers went up. Take a look at screen 2, look at the picture there, and what observations are you able to make based on the flaming splint reacting with oxygen gas? So the oxygen is, right, we see a flame, so it's flammable. It looks like there's flammable, right? The flame is lit. Okay. So this is what the Jamboard looks like. So what happens to the flame? So if you watch the video, the little match is lit and it goes into the test tube and it kind of mixes in with that oxygen and it does not go out, right? So oxygen does not extinguish the flame. Right, so what you guys have here is correct. So oxygen, we know, flammable, right? It's going to make the flame, and that's why when there's a fire, they say put a blanket on top, because that will smother out the oxygen and then the flame will die. All right, so going on to the next one, you have hydrogen. So there's hydrogen gas in the test tube. The flame was lit, the little match was lit, and when it got put into the test tube, it goes out and it made a weird little bleeping sound. So what happens to the flame in the presence of hydrogen gas? All right, definitely seeing some correct answers there. Good job. So if hydrogen gas is produced, the flame goes out. All right, got another one coming in. Excellent job. All right, so let's go on to the last one, carbon dioxide. So if carbon dioxide is produced, like in this picture, and a flame goes into the beaker, what happens to the flame in the presence of carbon dioxide? All right, so the flame does go out when there is carbon dioxide gas. Excellent job. Okay, so the next thing that you guys will need to do is, knowing that information, hopefully maybe you made yourself a little sticky note reminder, but when the three gases are produced, we should know what happens to the flame. So now, when we go into the experiment part of the lesson, and we actually put water, vinegar, lemon juice, and we mix these things up, and we hold the match over the beaker, we will be able to know what kind of gas is produced. All right? So if you will go into your lesson, go to 3.12. So if you go to the science homepage, go under content, go down to unit 3 on the left-hand side, and open up 3.12. This part is in the experiment section of the lesson. Okay, and then you're able to move all of these things. So if we look at the instructions together, it gives you step-by-step what to do to start. And it says, use the simulation to conduct a flaming splint test to identify the gas produced in a chemical reaction. So we kind of know, right, what we're looking for. We know that if oxygen is produced, that it will stay lit. And we know that if hydrogen or carbon dioxide is produced, it'll go out. So testing this on your own in the lesson using the simulation, you are able to see what happens if you add vinegar. So if you start up here at the top, it says to add vinegar to the Erlenmeyer flask. So you click vinegar and it pours it in. So if we were to look at that, I think I have to share it in a different way. Hang on one second. All right, now it's coming up. I'm going back into the lesson 3. Scrolling down to 312. Okay, clicking on the investigation part. And going to page 4. Sorry, my computer again. I apologize. It's slowing us down significantly today. Almost there. Yep, I do need to probably reset and restart the whole thing when I finish this session. Definitely. All right, come on, guy, you can do it. All right, so here's the procedure. Here is, we're waiting on this little screen to pop up, and we're starting with vinegar. So you add the vinegar in, and then it says add the baking soda. So we know vinegar is an acid. We know baking soda is a neutral item, right? Vinegar and baking soda. So we put that in. And then it says pick up the match. When you do that, it lights, place it over the opening of the flask. It goes out. So on your data table in your lab, you're able to start recording what you're seeing. So we did vinegar and baking soda here. The flame went out. We saw that it did bubble. So what possible gases would be produced here? All right, I'm going to let us refocus the chat real quick so we can go through the lesson, and you guys can work on that at the end of the session. Okay, so I've given you the first line to fill in, and we know that 2 possible gases were produced here, right? Because the flame was extinguished. So if you remember from our Jamboard on the splint test, you know those 2 gases that were produced. Okay, so if we go back and you clear it out, and then we go through these steps down here below, now we're adding, this is actually, I think if you would like to do it on your own, you can do this as an experiment at home. Nothing is going to like explode or anything like that. You're just holding a match over a glass to see if it produces a flame or not. So in our lesson, we're looking at vinegar and baking soda was our first combination. Then you could try water, which we know water is a base, right? You can add water. You can add baking soda. So H2O, and then the baking soda formula. It's written here if you want to kind of know the formulas of what we're dealing with. If you scroll to the bottom of your lab report, you can see vinegar is C2H4O2. Baking soda is this NaHCO2. Okay, so you're able to see kind of what we're looking at here and what it produces. So when you mix the 2, it produces this, and then you can see the options. It produces water, it produces carbon dioxide, it produces oxygen. So we're looking to see what's produced with vinegar and baking soda. Okay? All right, so if we go back here, this just lets you go through water, lemon juice, an effervescent tablet. This is like if you've ever had a retainer that you clean with the drops, you know, the things that you drop in to clean your dental appliances. That's an effervescent tablet. Alka-Seltzer is an effervescent tablet, so it has to bubble. So if you put that in, you can see what happens. Do we see bubbles? Yes. If we pick up our match, it goes out. So that tells us maybe hydrogen's produced, maybe carbon dioxide is produced. Okay, so you're just going through and trying to figure out what gas is produced. All right, so if we go back over and look at our lab report, okay, we'll scroll back up to the top and kind of go through quickly here what we've done so far. So what's the purpose of the experiment? I shared that with you guys earlier. If we go back, I kind of have to go back and forth on the screen share here. So the purpose of the experiment is to figure out the identity of the gas that's produced in the chemical reaction. Okay, when you get to question 2, it talks about how can you identify the gas produced in the chemical reaction without observing the atoms and the molecules directly. And it says on the page, see page 2 of 3 for reference. So we're going here. This is page 2 of 3 here, and it talks about indirect observations related to the properties of a substance to identify things. So if we can't see the atoms and molecules, we use indirect observations. So that helps you answer number 2. So then you've got to create your hypothesis. And the best way to do that is to say, if I do this, which would be kind of the purpose of our experiment, then I'm able to see this, right? So I like to plug in like 1 and 2 to make 3. I use that formula. If I use indirect observations to identify the gas produced, then actually I could complete or figure out what gas is being produced by using indirect observations. So if I use indirect observations for chemical reactions, then I can identify the gas produced. So you're just using 1 and 2 to create that hypothesis. All right, you with me so far? All right, and then if I go back to the page that shows us the items in the experiment, you can list what tools you see here. We see an Erlenmeyer flask. We see a match. You could list out all of those things. There's also a page in the lesson that shows you the same thing. So that's number 4. And then 5, it asks you for the procedure, and it gives you a procedure right here in the course, in the lesson. So if you go back to that page that we were on that said put the vinegar in, that's your procedure. So Reha, yes, I said that right at the beginning that we were going through the lesson together. So, and then I encouraged you to download the lab report to write down everything that I was saying so that you could have the answers filled in. All right, and then you've got your procedure for number 5, and then you go to number 6 where we are recording your data. So if I go back to my screen share, sorry again for the delay. Okay, we're able to fill in what we saw. We have vinegar, baking soda. You can list out all of those things, your flame result. Did it bubble or not? What are the gases that were produced? All right, then you get to your conclusion. It says, what conclusions can you draw about the identities of the gases produced in each chemical reaction? So write an evidence-based claim. That means you use the evidence. So Anwar, I mentioned this at the beginning as well. If you use the lab documents that I put under content, lab report documents, you'll have a data table. But if you use the lesson lab report that's found in the lesson, you will not. So it's the same questions. I just added things and put them under lab reports. All right, so we're able to pull the data here, possible gases produced, and write in our reactions. You can identify with vinegar specifically what you used and what gas was produced. Okay, so you're able to see and write out in the vinegar and baking soda reaction, I saw these gases and so on. You'll want to list those out. That's number 7. And then when you get to number 8, it's talking about, again, these are the chemical formulas of the actual products that we used in the experiment. So vinegar and baking soda mixed together, what did it produce? And so you kind of go back up here. Maybe you can compare what you wrote with you had vinegar and baking soda. And you're just looking at it written out in chemical formula, right? In written form here. And we can see that it produced this sodium, I'm not even actually sure how to say that, plus water and carbon dioxide. Okay, so we saw that was carbon dioxide a possible result listed at the top. And we just kind of look at all 4 of these formulas and see which is a possible gas that was produced. So what do you guys think based on the vinegar and baking soda, remembering the gases that were produced? Could have been one of 2, right? 2 of them put out the flame. Do you remember which 2? If anyone wrote down the notes from the flaming splint test, there were 2 different gases that put the flame out. So you've got to remember that. And then use that information to narrow down which formula shows what we did. You're right, Juliana, it was hydrogen and carbon dioxide. Both of those put out the flame. So now can we narrow down 2 possible answer choices? Do we see a reaction that produced carbon dioxide or hydrogen gas? Do we see that? Can we narrow down and eliminate 2 answers that did not? Okay, so if you see on the product side, over here on the other side of the arrow, we're looking specifically, I'm going to try to highlight, I'm not sure how it'll work, for what produced carbon dioxide or hydrogen. Okay, so out of those, which 2? Can you put 2 letter choices in chat? Which have hydrogen and carbon dioxide as a product? So where I have highlighted yellow, those are the products. All right, so from there, you're able to look at the 2 remaining equations that are possible answer choices. And you're now able to say, are they both balanced? Which one, if you've got to choose one, which one would it be? And you're going to want to choose only one of those out of the 2 is balanced. All right, so I see some answer choices coming into the chat. I will let you decide on those, what you're thinking based on everything we've covered today. All right, so you'll circle on your answer document, you'll circle the answer choice that you think it is, and then you'll briefly explain why. So you'll be able to explain everything we just went through. The gas that was produced, the equation was balanced. So that is how you'll answer number 8. All right. So we've gone through the entire report. I've given you all the information you need to answer it. Okay. This recording is available. It will be available in a few minutes after the session ends. And then you can also click on, it looks a little bit different than this in the announcements, but there's a link to all the sessions. You can go back, takes you to the recording library, and you can watch the session again. Okay, so it will show last year's session in there, but it's the same information. All right, and then if you have any questions, you need to go over anything, you can hang out and ask those. We can cover anything you might need to. And other than that, you guys are free to go.